Today we're tackling a classic photography debate: zoom lens or prime lens. Whether you're looking to upgrade your kit or you're picking up a camera for the first time and you're buying your first lenses, understanding the pros and cons of each is what's going to set you up to make an informed decision on what best lens to get for your photography style. By the end of this video, you'll have a solid understanding of the two different types of lenses and the pros and cons of each, so you can decide if you're team zoom or team prime. A zoom lens is a single lens with a variable focal length, and as the name suggests, it allows you to zoom in and out when you're standing in one place. It's extremely versatile because you cover multiple focal lengths within one lens. It works similarly to that of a point and shoot camera, where as you adjust the toggle on the zoom, the lens comes in and out. This one doesn't actually work anymore, so I can't actually show you. Conceptually, a zoom lens functions in almost the same way, although a zoom lens on a mirrorless or a DSLR camera has an optical zoom throughout the entire focal length, meaning it's not digitally zooming past what it physically can zoom to like a point and shoot camera does, where it's ruining your photo quality past a certain point of zoom. Examples of common zoom lens focal lengths are 15 to 35 millimeters, 24 to 70 millimeters, and 70 to 200 millimeters. Now, there's a lot of variables to those, but those three lenses specifically are typically known as what's called the Holy Trinity in the photography world. In addition to having zoom lenses with different focal ranges, there are functionally two different types of zoom lenses. The first is internal zoom and the second is external zoom. As an example, an internal zooming lens won't change size as you're zooming in or out. All of the zoom function is happening within the housing of the lens. Now, in contrast, if you look at an external zooming lens, you'll see that the lens moves as you're zooming in and out. A prime lens is different in that it carries a fixed focal length, meaning if you want to shoot something at 50 millimeters, you need a 50 millimeter prime lens. Now, the only way to zoom in and out with a prime lens is that you physically have to move your feet to get closer or further away from your subject, because this doesn't zoom. Before you write off prime lenses, stick with me, because in this case, big things do come in small packages. So let's compare the pros and cons of both zoom and prime lenses. Let's start with the pros and cons of zoom lenses. Now, zooms are fantastic for anybody who's out shooting events, sports, or even travel. The ability to adjust your focal length within a single lens without having to change your lens really makes you able to shoot at a much more efficient pace, and it's quite easy, to be honest. That brings me to the first pro of a zoom lens, and that is convenience. Zoom lenses allow you to cover multiple focal lengths within one single lens, and you don't have to change lenses while you're on the go. This is extremely convenient if you're traveling, and it's really great for beginner photographers who don't want to spend a lot of money on multiple lenses, and they can be as versatile and efficient in their shooting as possible with one singular lens. The second pro of a zoom lens is versatility. Imagine you're shooting an event, like a concert or a wedding. You can't always move around exactly where you want to go. Sometimes you're stuck in one spot because there's crowds around you and it's really busy. The zoom lens will allow you to maintain multiple focal lengths while standing in that same spot. The third pro of a zoom lens is that they're cost effective, kind of. While a single zoom lens is almost always going to be more expensive than a single prime lens, you can get away with buying fewer lenses because you're essentially getting multiple prime lenses when you buy a single zoom. So instead of buying 3, 4, or even 5 prime lenses to cover the same focal range, all you have to do is buy one. Let's be honest though, zoom lenses are far from perfect, so let's get into some of the cons. The first being, zoom lenses are typically less sharp than a prime lens. High quality zoom lenses have improved a ton over the years, but prime lenses still tend to be sharper overall. That I'll get into a little bit more in a bit. The second con of zoom lenses is that they're traditionally heavier and bulkier than prime lenses, so you're going to have to strap more weight to your back with the more zoom lenses that you carry. The third con is a slower aperture. Most affordable zoom lenses have what's called a variable aperture. So they have an aperture that changes throughout its entire zoom range. That may be f3.5 all the way up to f5.6. Some lenses have an even greater range than that. This means you can't maintain the same aperture throughout all of the focal lengths included within your lens unless you're willing to shell out more cash for a more expensive lens that's either an f4 constant aperture or an f2.8 constant aperture. And that brings me to my final con of zoom lenses, and that, quite frankly, is the price. A single zoom lens is typically much more expensive than a single prime lens, and that can turn a lot of people off of zooms. But it's important to remember the versatility that comes with a zoom because you have multiple focal lengths within that single lens, so you don't have to buy multiple zoom lenses. As an example, you can get a Canon RF24-70 f2.8 from B&H for roughly $2,300 right now. To cover that range with primes from Canon with equal or better quality, which for this example is an important distinction, you'd need a $1,500 24mm f1.4 prime, a $1,500 35mm f1.4 prime, and a $1,400 50mm f1.4 prime. Seeing as Canon doesn't make a 70mm prime to cover the full 24 to 70 zoom range, we can throw in the $600 85mm f2 to cover the additional reach, and you're looking at roughly $5,000 in total prime lenses. While this isn't a perfect one-to-one example, and there are a lot of variables that I didn't dive deeper on, the general point here still stands. You can definitely swap some of those primes out for cheaper versions. For example, you can go with a nifty 50, which is a 50mm f1.8. For Canon on the RF mount, this is a $200 lens new. You can get it used from anywhere between $100 to $150 on the secondary market. You just have to know where to look. Typically, to buy used lenses, I'll look at Facebook Marketplace, eBay, Craigslist. You just have to be watchful and mindful that you're not going to get scammed because scammers exist and they are the worst type of people. While a nifty 50 like this one isn't technically considered a premium lens, it's still a high quality lens that you can get a lot of use out of, and it's one of the first lenses I ever bought and still used today in my kit. Speaking of the nifty 50, now let's talk about prime lenses. Now, these may seem limiting because you're stuck at one focal point, but they come with a lot of advantages and there's quite a few pros to talk about with these. Because primes have fewer moving parts internally, they traditionally take sharper images than a zoom lens. You also don't need to worry about barrel distortion with a prime lens because, unlike a zoom lens, all of the optics inside of the lens aren't moving back and forth, so that's just not an issue on these. Think of it this way, prime lenses are very good at one thing, whereas a zoom lens is more of a jack of all trades, master of none. The next pro with a prime lens is that they have wider apertures in general. Most primes have apertures that go as wide as f1.8 or f1.4 and sometimes even f1.2 depending on your budget. These are all great for shooting in low light and getting those really creamy backgrounds with a lot of bokeh. A wide constant aperture zoom like an f2.8 is great in low light, but it does make a lot of difference when you can stop all the way down with the prime to f1.4 and really open up that aperture to get a lot more light when you're shooting in low light. As an example, here's an image I took with my 24-70 f2.8 lens. It's not bad, and I could crank my ISO to properly expose the image. However, if I switch to my 35mm f1.4 prime, you can see that by only changing my aperture to f1.4, I can properly expose the image while all settings remain the same. This is a game changer when it comes to low light photography. The last pro I want to mention for primes is that they're typically lighter and smaller than most zoom lenses. Because a prime lens has a fixed focal length, it doesn't need as much glass within the actual lens. The optics in a zoom lens are moving forward and backward, so it needs more components to be able to do that. Because of this, primes are often much more compact and easier to carry than their zoom counterparts. But just like zooms, primes definitely have their drawbacks and they're not perfect. So the first con I want to talk about with a prime lens is that they're pretty limiting. Because you're stuck on one focal length with a prime lens, you physically have to move your body to zoom in and out and get a different composition within your frame. So some situations won't allow that depending on where you're shooting from. The next con with prime lenses is that you need multiple lenses. Now, this is something I covered previously, but in my opinion, it's the biggest con that is associated with prime lenses. If you want to cover multiple focal lengths, you have to carry multiple lenses with you, and that can be cumbersome and not very cost effective. And because you have multiple lenses, that brings me to the final con of always having to swap out your lens. If you're shooting fast-paced events like sports or a wedding, having to constantly swap out your lens is going to slow you down, and ultimately that's going to cause you to miss some big moment within that event. Everyone knows you don't want to miss the first kiss. Now that you have an understanding of the differences between prime and zoom lenses and the pros and cons that come with each type, you may be asking yourself, what lens should I buy? I'm not here to tell you what lens to purchase because both primes and zooms are great in different situations. My hope is that I've armed you with enough information to understand the pros and cons of each to be able to make your own informed decision for what lens you feel like is going to be best suited to your photography style. If you're interested, I've left links in the description down below for great options for both zoom and prime lenses on Canon, Sony, Nikon, and Fujifilm. I think that a lot of these options are great if you're just starting out and you're looking to get into photography as a beginner. If you found this video helpful, give it a like for the algorithm and let me know down in the comments below what's your go-to type of lens. And if you don't have either yet, let me know what lens you plan on purchasing. If you want to stick around for more photo tips and learn more about how to build out a proper photography kit, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a future video. Until next time, go out and use your camera.